Chapter 1: The Boy Who Waited. The gardens of Velmore Castle smelled of crushed mint and rain-soaked stone the summer Elian turned 10. He remembered it clearly because it was the same summer Prince Theron, heir to the throne, stopped being a stranger and became something else entirely. A shadow that followed him between the hedgerows, a voice that called his name before anyone else could. "You're slow," Theron said, not unkindly. The first time they raced down the long gravel path behind the orangery. He was a year older, sharper in the shoulders, with a seriousness that didn't belong on a boy his age. "You cheated. You started before me. I'm the prince. I can start whenever I like." Elian had scowled at him, and Theron had laughed. Really laughed, the kind of laugh that cracked his careful composure wide open. And from that day on they were inseparable. Elian's father, the old duke, had brought him to court for the betrothal negotiations of an older cousin, never expecting his second son to be claimed so thoroughly by the crown prince's attention. They grew up trading secrets over the castle walls. Theron taught Elian how to hold a sword properly. Elian taught Theron how to skip stones across the lake without flinching when the water sprayed back. They carved their initials into the old willow by the eastern wall, a careless, childish thing, done with a stolen kitchen knife and the unspoken understanding that some things were permanent. "When I'm king," Theron told him once, the summer they were 14, lying in the grass with their fingers nearly touching, "you'll be right beside me. I won't have it any other way." Elian had believed him. That was the trouble. He had believed him with his whole unguarded heart. It ended the way these things often do, not with cruelty but with politics. The old king grew ill, the court grew anxious, and a duke's second son, however beloved, was not a fitting match for the future ruler of Velmore. Theron was betrothed, on paper, to a foreign princess before he turned 16. A piece moved on a board neither of them controlled. The last summer they spent together, Theron said almost nothing. He simply held Elian's hand under the willow tree until the bell rang for evening prayers, and then he let go. Elian did not see him again for 11 years. Chapter 2: The Duke Returns. Elian came back to the capital the spring his father died, dressed in mourning black, carrying the weight of a dukedom he hadn't asked for. Aldrich Hollow needed its master, and so he returned, not for the court, not for the king, but because duty did not wait for old wounds to heal. He told himself he was prepared to see Theron again. He was wrong. The throne room of Velmore had changed little in 11 years, but the man who sat on it had changed entirely. Gone was the lanky boy with grass-stained knees. In his place sat a king in full command of himself, dressed in deep blue and silver, his expression unreadable as Elian knelt before the dais to offer formal condolences and the oath of his new title. "Rise, Duke Voss," Theron said. His voice was steadier than Elian remembered, but something flickered beneath it. Something Elian didn't dare name. "Your Majesty." Elian kept his eyes lowered, the way protocol demanded. It was easier than looking at him. "You may go." A pause. "Welcome home." The words followed Elian out of the throne room like a hand pressed to his back. He told himself it meant nothing. Kings said welcome home to every returning noble. It was courtesy, not memory. He repeated this to himself for 3 days until the summons came, not a formal court appearance, but a private invitation to walk the eastern gardens at dusk. He almost didn't go. His pride argued against it. The 11-year-old ache underneath his ribs argued harder. He went. Theron was already there when Elian arrived, standing beneath the same willow tree, fingers resting against the bark where 2 sets of initials had long since faded into the wood's growth. "It's still here," Theron said, without turning. "I had the gardeners leave this section wild. No one asked why." Elian's throat tightened. "Your Majesty." Theron came out sharper than he likely intended. He turned, and for one unguarded moment, the king's careful mask slipped, and Elian saw the boy who used to chase him down the gravel path. "Just Theron. When it's only us." "There is no only us anymore," Elian said quietly. "You're the king. I'm aware of what I am." Something hardened in Theron's jaw. "I have been reminded of it every day for 11 years. They stood in silence beneath the willow, the space between them small enough to close and wide enough to drown in. Chapter 3 Old Wounds, New Walls. Elian built walls quickly after that. He attended court when summoned, answered when spoken to, and otherwise kept to the townhouse his family held in the capital, burying himself in ledgers and correspondence from Aldrich Hollow. It was safer than gardens at dusk, safer than memory. But Velmore was a small world at the top, and a king who wished to see someone generally found a way. Theron began inviting him to council sessions that didn't strictly require a duke's presence. He asked Elian's opinion on trade matters concerning Aldrich Hollow's northern border, then on matters that had nothing to do with Aldrich Hollow at all. He lingered after meetings. He remembered, unprompted, that Elian preferred bitter tea without honey, and the cups began arriving correctly without anyone asking. "You're doing this on purpose," Elian said one evening, after the third such cup appeared at his elbow during a particularly dull tax session. "Doing what?" Theron didn't even look up from his papers, but the corner of his mouth betrayed him. "You know precisely what. I am the king of Velmore. I have many important things to attend to. A beat. Apparently one of them is your tea." Elian wanted to be angry. He found, infuriatingly, that he could not manage it. The old fondness kept surfacing despite his every effort to drown it. In the curve of Theron's tired smile, in the way he still tucked his hair back the exact same way he had at 16, in the unbearable familiarity of being looked at like he mattered. It would have been easier if Theron had simply forgotten him. It would have hurt less. Instead, Theron remembered everything, and made certain Elian knew it. The court began to whisper. A duke given private audiences far beyond his rank. A king who cancelled foreign correspondence to walk the gardens at dusk with the same man, evening after evening. Elian heard the rumors secondhand, delivered with poorly disguised glee by his own household staff, and felt something cold settle in his chest. "They'll say I've bewitched you," he told Theron bluntly, the next time they stood beneath the willow. "Or worse, they'll say you're being foolish over a boy you knew as a child. Let them say it. You can't mean that. You're the king. You have a country to think of, a succession to secure." I have spent 11 years thinking of my country," Theron interrupted, low and rough. "I gave it my marriage prospects. I gave it my youth. I have never once, in all that time, stopped thinking of you." Elian's breath caught. He took a step back instinctively, putting distance between them like armor. "Don't." "Why not?" "Because I cannot survive losing you twice." The admission hung in the air, raw and unplanned, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then Theron closed the distance Elian had tried to create, slow and deliberate, and pressed his forehead to Elian's. "Then don't lose me," Theron murmured. "Stay. Let me prove it this time." Chapter 4 The Law of Velmore. The trouble, as always, was the law. Velmore's ancient marriage statutes were explicit. The crown required an heir-bearing union, sealed by a partner of recognized noble blood and, traditionally, of the opposite sex. No king of Velmore had ever taken a husband. No precedent existed for it. The old advisors, gray-bearded men who remembered Theron's father and grandfather, would not simply nod along to a king's private wishes. Theron called council after council. He argued precedent from neighboring Calwyn, where royal consorts of any gender had been recognized for 2 generations. He argued the dukedom's loyal service, the Voss family's centuries of fealty, the fact that succession could be secured through alternate means, adoption of an heir, a sanctioned surrogate arrangement, half a dozen legal workarounds his lawkeepers reluctantly admitted existed in theory. The court resisted. Of course they resisted. "You would upend 300 years of marriage law?" Lord Chancellor Brennick said one frigid morning. "For a private affection, I would upend 300 years of marriage law," Theron answered, ice in his voice. "Because the law as it stands is a relic that serves no one but men too frightened to imagine differently. I am not asking your permission, Chancellor. I am informing you of my intent." It was not so simple, of course. Petitions had to be drafted, precedent gathered. The High Court of Velmore convened to formally amend the statute rather than merely waive it for one man's benefit. Theron insisted on that distinction fiercely, refusing any version of the law that would read as an exception made only for a king's convenience. "If I change this," he told Elian one night, exhausted, ink-stained, half collapsed at his desk, I want it changed for good, not just for us. For anyone in Velmore who has ever loved the so-called wrong person. Elian, watching him from the doorway, felt something in his chest crack open. Not with old grief this time, but something gentler, more dangerous. Hope, you'll exhaust yourself, he said softly, crossing the room to rest a hand on Theron's shoulder. Probably. Theron leaned into the touch, eyes closing briefly. Worth it. Theron. Elian hesitated. What if it fails? What if the court refuses? Then I will ask again. And again. For as long as it takes. Theron caught Elian's hand, pressed it briefly to his lips. A small, unking-like gesture, intimate in its simplicity. I lost 11 years waiting for permission I should never have needed. I am done waiting. The vote, when it finally came, was close. Closer than Theron's advisors had hoped. Closer than Elian could bear to watch unfold from the gallery above the chamber floor. But it passed. The marriage statute of Velmore was formally amended, opening royal union to any partner of recognized noble standing, regardless of gender, by a margin of 7 votes. Theron found Elian in the corridor afterward, both of them breathless from entirely different kinds of running, and kissed him in front of half the assembled court. Soft, certain 11 years overdue. Chapter 5 Whispers and Thorns. Changing the law did not silence its critics. It simply moved their objections from the council floor to the shadows. Letters arrived at Elian's townhouse, and signed venomous, questioning his motives, his bloodline, his right to stand beside a king. A faction of the old nobility, led quietly by Lord Brennick's allies, began circulating rumors that Elian had used some old childhood intimacy to manipulate a grieving, overburdened monarch into an unprecedented and reckless decision. Elian bore it silently at first, the way he'd been trained to bear most things. He didn't tell Theron about the letters. He didn't mention the cold reception at court functions, the way certain doors that had once opened easily now closed a beat too slow, a beat too deliberate. It was Theron who found one of the letters, left carelessly on Elian's desk during a visit, the ink still damp with the venom of its accusations. How long has this been happening? Theron's voice was dangerously quiet. It's nothing. Court gossip always. How long, Elian? Since the amendment passed. Elian sighed, finally meeting his eyes. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing it bother me, or you the burden of fixing something that isn't yours to fix. Everything that touches you is mine to fix. Theron's jaw was tight with a fury Elian rarely saw directed outward. I will not have you suffer in silence for a law I fought for. Theron. Elian caught his wrist before he could storm toward the door, toward Brennick's faction, toward a confrontation that would only feed the rumors further. If you go to them like this, you prove their argument, that I make you reckless, that love has made you a worse king instead of a better one. Theron stilled, breathing hard, the anger slowly draining into something more controlled, more dangerous in its patience. Then tell me what you want me to do. Nothing yet. Let them throw their thorns. I have weathered worse than anonymous letters. Elian managed a faint, tired smile. I only ask that you don't shut me out of the trouble, even when you're trying to protect me from it. We agreed there would be no more silences between us. Theron exhaled, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. He drew Elian into his arms instead, resting his chin atop his head the way he used to when they were boys hiding from tutors in the orangery. No more silences, he agreed quietly. I promise. It would take months yet, quiet investigations, a scandal involving embezzled funds that conveniently unseated 2 of Brennick's loudest allies, careful diplomacy on Theron's part to shore up support among the moderate nobility, before the whispers faded into background noise rather than open threat. But they faced each piece of it together, exactly as promised. Chapter 6 The Wedding of Velmore. The wedding took place in early autumn, when the leaves along the eastern garden wall had just begun to turn copper and gold, beneath the same willow tree where 2 boys had once carved their initials into soft, unknowing bark. It was, by royal standards, a quiet affair. Theron had insisted on that, against the protests of half his court, who wanted spectacle befitting a king. He wanted, instead, something that felt true. A small gathering of household staff who remembered them as children, a handful of loyal nobles who had stood by the amendment from its first reading, and Elian's own retainers from Aldrich Hollow, who openly wept through most of the ceremony. Elian wore deep green, the color of Aldrich Hollow's banners, against Theron's royal blue. A deliberate choice, a quiet statement that this was a union of equals, not an absorption of one house into another. When the officiant asked for the binding vow, old and traditional, slightly altered now to fit a marriage the law had never anticipated, Theron's voice did not waver. "I have loved you since I was old enough to know what the word meant," Theron said, low enough that it felt almost private despite the gathered witnesses. "I lost you once to forces neither of us controlled. I will not lose you again. Whatever crown I wear, whatever throne I hold, you are the steadiest thing I have ever known. Stay with me, Elian. Truly, this time. For good." Elian's vow, when it came, was quieter, the words catching slightly in his throat. "You once told me that when you became king, I would stand beside you, and you wouldn't have it any other way. I didn't believe a king's promise could survive 11 years and 100 political storms." He glanced up, eyes bright. "I was wrong to doubt you. I won't make that mistake again. I'm yours, Theron. I think I always have been." The kiss that sealed their vows was soft, unhurried, 11 years and 100 quiet aches folded into it, and when they finally turned to face the small crowd of witnesses, hand in hand beneath the old willow tree, the entire garden seemed to exhale with them. Chapter 7: Crown and Oath. Winter came gently to Velmore that year, the first snow falling soft and unremarkable over a capital that had, despite every dire prediction, not collapsed beneath the weight of an unprecedented royal marriage. Trade continued. Harvests had been good. The sky had not, contrary to Lord Brennick's most dramatic warnings, fallen. Elian took on new duties as prince consort, splitting his time between Aldrich Hollow's affairs and a growing involvement in Velmore's legal reforms, quietly, methodically working alongside the moderate nobility to extend the marriage amendment's principles into other corners of the old, brittle laws. It suited him, this work. Theron said, more than once and with no shortage of fondness, that Elian had clearly been wasted on ledgers and tax columns when he had this kind of patient, persistent fire in him all along. Succession, in the end, was settled the way Theron had once argued it could be, through formal adoption of his cousin's second son as heir apparent. A boy of 7 with Theron's same serious eyes and Elian's same quiet patience for him already evident in the way he followed the prince consort around the castle gardens, asking endless questions about the willow tree and the initials carved into its bark. "Will you tell him?" Theron asked one evening, watching from the window as Elian patiently demonstrated, for what was likely the 10th time, how to skip a stone across the frozen edge of the lake without flinching when the ice cracked beneath it. "Tell him what?" "That it took us 11 years and an act of parliament to end up exactly where we started." Elian laughed, really laughed, the kind that still, after everything, made Theron's chest ache with something dangerously close to disbelief that this was his life now. "I'll tell him the law changed because his king refused to accept that love and duty were opposites. That seems a better lesson than the 11 years it took to learn it." Theron crossed the room, wrapping his arms around Elian from behind as they both watched the boy below toss another stone, laughing when it finally skipped twice before sinking. "For what it's worth," Theron murmured against his ear, "I would do it again. Every council session, every vote, every furious letter and every cold winter waiting for you to come home. All of it. As many times as it took." "I know." Elian turned in his arms, resting his forehead against Theron's the way he had that first night beneath the willow, years and a lifetime ago. "That's rather the whole point, isn't it? You never stopped waiting. Neither did I." Outside, the snow kept falling soft and steady, over a kingdom that had, in the end, learned to bend its oldest laws around the shape of one stubborn, enduring love, and beneath the willow tree, where 2 sets of childhood initials had long since been joined by a third, smaller set, freshly carved, the boy who would one day be king kept skipping stones across the ice, utterly unaware of just how long it had taken his fathers to get here. End.